Thank you so much. Good morning. So I am here to tell you today about a story that we've all been trained to think is not possible. To tell you about a living, breathing, real, live, functioning startup embedded deep in the bowels of government that is actually working to bring Silicon Valley best practices and completely change the way that we look at building digital services for our citizens. That team is called the United States Digital Service, and we are embedded with our headquarters inside the White House, and we have a very simple play. The idea is to bring in the most incredible talent in the technology industry that our country has to offer, to line them up with the amazing public servants that are already inside government today working on delivering services for citizens, and let them loose on the most important problems that we have, the most important services that our country offers. Now, in the process of doing this, the most important piece is giving them the incredible amount of air cover and mandate to actually go in and transform those services so they start working like every citizen expects their government services to work. As they identify barriers, we are strategically positioned to go in and knock down those walls behind them to make sure that they can actually accomplish that end mission of making sure our government services work. Now, I know the first part of that play of convincing people to actually come into government is a little bit crazy. We have, needless to say, as everybody here knows, we don't have a ton of perks that we get to offer inside government. Our salaries are pretty capped. It's hard to compete with the micro kitchens and the free dry cleaning at Google and whatnot. But I'm here to tell you something even crazier, which is that today we have over 150 of the most talented people I could have ever imagined working with inside the federal government right now working on this mission. And these are not just anybody. These are incredible, incredible public servants who have signed up for tours of duty between 3 and 6 months or all the way up to 2 and 4 years. That we have poached from some of our, of the most incredible institutions, from metaphysical Silicon Valley, from Twitter to Facebook to Amazon, and more. But all these 150 people are not sitting in one single location. Because if you look at government, changing it is not as similar to just actually updating the business processes of, say, a company. It's actually an entire industry that needs disrupting. And so to do that, we have a very thought-out strategy to deploy these teams, deploy these people in hyper-networked teams across government. And so what that looks like today is we have our headquarters team based inside the White House. We have a second layer where we are embedding teams inside to the agencies that own the services that we're working on transforming so they can teach while they transform. And then we have our largest team, which Todd Park likes to call the Arsenal of Democracy, 18F, which is a centralized powerhouse delivery unit that is working on actually changing the way that we build services from the ground up. Now, like any good startup, we got our start in what you could call a pretty large failure. We like to think of it as our first prototype and the first working example of the play. Oops, sorry about that. But this doesn't need much explanation for anybody in this room. This is the most recognized 404 page in America. Sadly, this is HealthCare.gov. And like I said, it's sort of the first prototype that we like to think about of actually running the play of bringing in people bringing in people from the private sector. Now, this HealthCare.gov was a huge deal, as Uncle Joe likes to remind us. And it was a huge deal for a lot of reasons, not just because this was the first time that our country had actually a fighting chance at passing the most aggressive healthcare reform in over 88 years, but it was a gigantic deal because this was the first time in the history of our government that a website was actually potentially getting in the way of Americans' lives being saved. Think about that. A website meant that more people were possibly going to die because they didn't have access to healthcare. And this coming from the previous administration, where the previous president didn't even use email. I mean, think about that shift, where you could run a country without even using email to all of a sudden in 2013, when your website didn't work, lives were in the balance. And so there was this gigantic shift that had happened, and we needed to make sure that, obviously, this website got up and running. So we ran the play. We set up the bat signals. bat signal, and we assembled the best of the Avengers, well, an incredible set of Avengers, and dropped in a team of what many people don't realize was only 6 people at any given moment to go into the morass of HealthCare.gov and figure out how we could actually change it. Now, that story is one that I could go talk about for another 30 minutes, what we found on the ground when we got into HealthCare.gov, and it's been well covered. But everyone in this room knows the main things that we found. The first was that there was a gigantic governance problem. No one was in charge. But more importantly, government builds software the same way that it builds battleships. We have this crazy long process that is focused on requirements gathering phases that takes all of the emphasis onto the actual process of building rather than the user needs. And that is what we fundamentally needed to change. So you may notice that, as we all know, HealthCare.gov ended up not necessarily working or becoming like the best practice of websites that we know, but it ended up no longer impeding the president's policy goal. And we got 8 million people enrolled in healthcare after the first open enrollment season. And you may have noticed in the last open enrollment season, we accomplished one of our main goals, which was keeping the website actually not the focus of the news, and rather the people that were getting help. And that happened largely due to 2 big upgrades I'll tell you about quickly that we did in partnership with our incredible partners at HHS and some contractors as well, to actually start putting the focus back on what was missing, which was the user need. So when you look at the process of actually shopping, the shopper experience, before the App 2.0 upgrade, the worst case scenario application included 76 clicks, and the average processing time was about 20 minutes. We actually re-looked at what exactly was needed from the user perspective and brought that down to 16 screens at the worst case application, which had about an average of 9 minutes. This is yeah, thank you. And we did this through what everybody in this room knows as common as, just as simple as breathing oxygen, was using private sector best practices, shifting to agile development, focusing on user needs, using modern technology stacks. And as our administrator, Mikey Dickerson, likes to say, he's normal on the planet he comes from. This was not revolutionary technology problems we were trying to solve. We were actually just bringing in new practices and new ways of doing things that the Valley and the private sector has perfected that we are ready for and need desperately inside government. Now, the second big upgrade that we released is a fascinating one. The system that was actually responsible for about 70% of the errors in the first open enrollment season was developed for several $100 million, and it had a maintenance cost of over $50 million every year as well. And given that it didn't work super well, that was obviously top on our list to change. So we ended up releasing, with a very, very small team, rebuilding that system. Thank you. Now, our estimate is that was around $4 million. That's what we're estimating. But I think government has a hard time counting that low, so it's probably way lower than that. But that's a generous estimate. And it works really well, as you can see. So what we all know, though, is that there was a bigger reality we were living in, which is, sadly, that HealthCare.gov was not the only technology project in government that was behind schedule and over budget. In fact, 94% of them are. 94%. The bigger problem is that because our services were so not what everyone was expecting and did not meet citizens' needs, we were actually impacting citizens' trust in their government, which is horrible for democracy, as we've spent a lot of time talking about at this conference in the last 2 days. And even worse, we were disproportionately impacting the very people who needed government's help the most, which was not okay, obviously. Which is where I get to the part of the story that I never thought, rewind 18 months, I would have never thought I'd say out loud, which is that HealthCare.gov is one of the best things that could have happened for civic tech, and why I believe that in 2015, we are standing right now at the most optimistic, important moment that we all have in civic tech, and we have had in a decade, and might for the next decade if we don't take this opportunity and deliver against it. HealthCare.gov taught us some incredible things. The most important was that the riskiest option is currently the status quo. Government has optimized everything to avoid risk, and unfortunately by doing so, we are living in a world where doing the same thing that we have done for the last several decades is no longer an option. It also did two other very, very interesting things. It actually, for the first time, I think, sent a very large signal to technology talent and to engineers that they had value inside government. The same way that we've been able to do for lawyers who actually see a call to public service very often, being a public defender or clerking for a Supreme Court justice is a badge of honor, right? That is an incredible thing for your career. We see it as well in finance, working in Treasury. You will have a very easy time applying for jobs on Wall Street. But we didn't have those same outlets in tech. And what this did was it was a huge beacon saying, if you are an engineer, if you understand how to design for user needs, if you are an incredible designer that builds products that work, we need you. America needs you because lives are in the balance here. That was a gigantic wake-up call, and I think actually it was the first time that we kind of had that gravity and the ease of grasping that. And the last surprising thing was it actually really fostered a huge amount of a bipartisan agenda, if you will. Because as we've seen with the SLS example, the identity management example, and some of the things we've done in HealthCare.gov, this can be done cheaper. Government can be more efficient. And there's nobody on either side of the aisle that doesn't want that to happen. And we have a model for getting that done. So these three things were wildly important for refocusing us on what the actual strategy here, which is delivery. The strategy is actually going in and getting this work done, tackling the most important services that we have, and getting moving on it. And we needed this wind in the sails to actually push us into the space of this being a crisis, of the flip the table over moment, where we had to actually start delivering. What many people don't know about the United States Digital Services, we actually had been working on building this way before HealthCare.gov happened. We had launched a first not successful, necessarily super successful effort in early 2012 that we got some great programs out of, but it didn't fix the broader problem. And we had been working with incredible people like Jen Polka, who we had poached from Code for America to come in and help us think through how we do this at a broader scale. And we had been pitching these, and when HealthCare.gov happened, we continued into the budget pitches, and all of a sudden it was this collective moment of realization that this is what we needed to invest in. We needed to start delivering. And so that's exactly what our team is positioned to do today. We have teams right now working inside the veterans, the VA, because as our previous speaker was talking about, there's no shortage of problems in actually making sure veterans get the care that they need. We have teams positioned inside the Social Security Administration, inside education, looking at student loans. I'm actually going to tell you very briefly, because I don't want to run over time here, about one of our other teams that is working inside immigration right now. So just like HealthCare.gov, we had a very similar experience with immigration, which is an entirely paper-based process. It is, which might not surprise anybody. And so there was this idea that we should potentially pull that online, that it actually might help users and it might make things more efficient. Now, that is such a simple idea that we obviously weren't the first people to have that, and USCIS had spent the last 10 years trying to do this. They built a monolithic contract. They spent 5 years, several years doing requirements gathering, and at the end of the first 5 years, 0 results were delivered. Now, and I won't even go into the cost of that contract. Now, USCIS realized this, and they have an incredible CTO, Mark Schwartz, who was actually helping and instrumental in figuring out how we shift the way that we look at doing this huge waterfall delivery processes and breaking them into smaller pieces. So we partnered up with him and the incredible team on the ground to actually start taking the immigration process and thinking about what it would mean if the citizens or if the users were at the front. Today, the immigration process is so complicated. There's hundreds of forms to fill out. It takes often up to 6 months. At any given point, your paper application has traveled the world several times over by the time we're done mailing it from physical processing center to physical processing center. It's so complicated to understand that most users actually have to go to other websites and forums to figure out exactly what forms they're supposed to fill out. It's not even offered on, that was the primary outlet for information. So what 18F actually built this piece, what 18F built was this incredible product called My USCIS, which was focused on how we get users the information they need and make it easy and simple and intuitive for them to find and understand. We're also working on taking this as the paper form for one example of a green card And this is the paper form you have to fill out. And we're working on bringing all of this online with USCIS as well. We released a soft launch just a couple of weeks ago. My USCIS just went out a couple weeks ago as well. And for the first time, you can now process your replacement green card fully online. Yes. They've had about 40,000 applications come through the system already, more and more by the day. And the people that get the biggest shout out is the agency at USCIS for actually doing this incredible work of changing the way that they're building services. And we're happy to come along and help. So we're just getting started. We have the very visceral realization that everyone here knows, which is that in today's world, you can no longer separate governing from smart technology strategy. We believe, despite how long this process has been, that even in the most inhospitable institutions like government, change can happen. There are real problems that need to be solved. There is no other option that we have than doing things differently. And right now, the biggest question is, will we? This is on us. If we do not take this opportunity, we might not have this again, the stars aligning, for years to come. The only thing right now that's going to stop us from doing this is having enough hands and enough people in the room who know how to do this well, to come in and join government and do this with us. So if you're interested in joining, that's where you can, whitehouse.gov/USDS. Thank you so much.